With the color at vertex map built, we're going to create an emission using the cigarette geo as the emitter. I'll get an empty point cloud. I'm going to call this the cigarette point cloud. Open up an ice tree and create a simulated ice tree on that point cloud. Under the emitters tab, I'm going to pull in an Emit In Place compound, which is just a modified version of the emit from surface. I'm going to pull in the geometry of the cigarette as my emitter. And if I look under my favorites, a simulate particles node will also be used to get the particles to eventually die. So we get all of our points emitted at various locations on the emitter geo. Now what I'm going to actually do is change the shape of these particles by double clicking on the Emit In Place and changing them to a type rectangle. And I'm going to have a bit of overlap if I deal with particles at both the top and bottom of the cigarette on the open ends. So I'm going to cull them out by painting a weight map and filtering by that weight map. So if I get property, weight map, I'll paint Polygon influence. Oh, I should probably go a little bit smaller here. And when I get down to the bottom, just make sure I go a little bit close to the edges. I've got an extra row of edges here so that there's no overlap between my weights on the top and bottom on the tobacco end of the cigarette. Okay, that looks good on the bottom, and I'll just move to the top of the cigarette and do the same thing. So I'll just take my brush, size it down a little bit. And just account for all of the vertices except for the ones on top. Okay, so I'm almost back around to the beginning. There we go. So I'll find a node that filters by weight map. So if I look under my weight map based tools in the filter menu, I'll filter by weight map and filter polygons like so. If I just double click here, I'll pull in the weights from my weight map 1. Next thing I'm going to do is align the particles to the surface. If I look under my orientation compounds, I can align the particles to the surface normals by applying a surface input, the cigarette geometry, and executing that. If I increase the number of particles now to say 3,000, I get a lot of extra particles, and now I can work with the scale of those particles. Maybe I'll increase the size a little bit more, say 10,000, to fill in any of these extra gaps, and at least I won't have any along the top that are overlapping at all. So I'll add a random scale. I'll just pull in a scale setter, set particle scale, and I'll plug it in underneath the align. And I'll take the scale, and again, I don't really need to worry about the Y scale because I'm dealing with flat rectangles, but I can certainly work on the X scale of the particles and the Z scale. I'll add a few more particles in. So there we go, we have 30,000 particles now. If I draw a render region just to show what this looks like, I get the particles looking something like that. I could smooth them out if I wanted to by changing the shape type to something like sphere and flattening them out. But again, for this effect, I'm going to go with rectangles to keep it a little simpler. Okay, so the second parts of our cigarette are done. We've got our weight map restricting the effect in some areas. We've got our particles aligned to the surface normals of the cigarette geo, and we've elongated them a little bit, made them a little bit more rectangular rather than squares. So now let's extract the color from the cigarette geometry color at vertex map and apply it to the particles.